Is it recording? Right, hello, my name is Deoffal Maldoror. I'm a dark surrealist artist, illustrator, painter, theorist involved with pessimistic theory and cosmic horror narratives within contemporary art. In particular, focusing on the works of H.P. Lovecraft and his impact on mangakas within contemporary graphic novels. And so my work tends to have pessimistic dialogues and informed by portraiture and in turn inform the works of philosophy that come after them. In particular, the inspiration found in the works of Osmo Deisai and his leading figure, Yozo Oba. Yozo Oba being an intrinsic pessimist, someone who, by all initiatives, cannot shake their instincts and pessimistic dialogue and nihilistic outlooks and sort of an anarchistic opinion of the people they meet. And the way in which that's affected my work is not only a cross-cultural conversation, and I'm referring now to Japanese literary authors or philosophers and artists, but in seeing how they're influenced by Western theorists and philosophers and artists. So a particular point of Deisai's work being the references to Amedeo Modigliani, Dostoevsky, of Harold Lloyd, American comedian, and Asian man, discussing how the idea of the absurd, the comedic, comes into his portraiture as someone who is fascinated by the malformed face and the idea of depicting ghosts in his own, I guess, representation of conflicts through portraiture. And that then informed Yozoism as my stance on contemporary dark surrealist artworks and how they're informed by both literature, philosophy, and art as the kind of the caveat as how it is expressed within contemporary media. Giving a greater insight to my practice, my name, Deoffal Maldoror, originated from a previous alias I had worked with when discussing theological concepts, which was Saint Hyena the Hermit, when I was far more fascinated by life post-womb and the hermitage in a ever increasingly assimilated culture, and the arguments were in sort of finding, I guess, comedy and catastrophe that we are awake to. A kind of apocalyptic attitude of contemporary pessimistic narratives post-God or post-religion and so forth. So a kind of an artistic response to the works of people like Nietzsche or Schopenhauer or the modernists more generally, discussing people like Voltaire and the absurd idea of the garden, cultivating your own purposes in spite of moral or ethical panic, and how that can function through artwork. And so the name now, as I guess a push into philosophical directions, originates from the Anglo-Saxon word for devil, i.e., I believe it was Deoffal or Deoffal, which indirectly just means diabolical or devil as often as kind of interchangeable. And offal being offal in the sense of the abattoir and butchery, and so it's kind of like a devilish offal. And Maldoror, coming from the works of the Comte de Tremont, who discussed the idea of an incarnation of evil, the Maldoror, the protagonist of his story, the Chance de Maldoror, who is totally driven by their own sense of morality and ethicality, and sees that all is their responsibility to act, and that no sort of form of sensibility can totally inform them or control them. And so in, I think a literal translation of Maldoror is almost a sort of foul odour. And common thread throughout Maldoror is the argument against religious iconographies or moral fixed posts, or in sensible discussion, rational dialogue, and so that's why it's such a almost surrealistic gospel to people like Dali or René Magritte, to Modigliani, as I discussed earlier. And wherein that comes into my own work, again, is that phrasing from literature and getting the majority of concepts from literature as the fuel beyond imagery and beyond the narrative as something that is purely static on a page, and how that transforms into imagery, which again links well to realism that's taken direct inspiration from Duchamp's work and its impact as kind of almost an amoral gospel in contemporary art, and often speaking to underground narratives or underground artists. And contemporary time now, that would be your Geigers or your Kinskis, and all your comic illustrators like your Crumbs, your Itos, your Muses, your Kinos, who, against the sort of generational differences between either your Japanese or your American artists, being that distinct interest in pessimistic concepts and aesthetics, living in almost a Baconian idea of the abattoir, and deepening the game by returning the onlooker more violently to art and those who would interrogate it as a critical discourse beyond mere stasis, from philosophical theorem to gallery and so forth. And I'm ranting at this point, as I played. But giving a quick summary of the works featured in the show, there is a Baconian insight, and one of the images are called Granite Temkin, directly based on Bacon's obsession with the open mouth, that idea of the shocked expression, the idea of being effaced by something so severe that it leaves you almost impounded by emotional distress, and a visceral reaction always being to almost leave yourself more open to distress. It's an opening the eyes and having a revelation of terror and so forth. And others there's tension, sort of knotted brain. I think I feel I'm often discussing in the work is a kind of psychological contortion, and how in portraiture now having to display not just an expression of frustration, but the innate feelings of a contemporary frustration, whether that is in a day's iron sense of the individual versus the individual, or a fear of the existential in the microbial, and the tensions found in paranoid discussions and random slightly. But and even then, there's sincerity there is a key concept in post-Dosaian literature, that idea that each person in their own way is deceitful, and that there is no truth in what they're saying to others. And that's a common discussion in pessimism, the idea of interpersonal present conflict, for hoping to be presentable to others and hoping that saves you from some divine punishment. And there's also the seed piece, which speaks directly of potential, and how potential is this thing, even in art now, beyond even a pessimistic narrative, the idea of nurturing potential, which is almost representational of a mass as an art group, and that we're having to nurture a seed, and recognising the value of the seed as not just this sort of waste product of previous life. There's cattle, a direct commentary on the suffocation and sociality in the crowding spaces, and the ever diminishing room for temperance and quiet, and finding desolation more so in a crowded lift than in an open field or some derelict dark building with an old fascination. And there's involuntary compromise, which I'm cycles. That piece is attached currently to, again, that sort of psychological contortion. I think I see a lot within pessimistic literature is the idea of a bipolar narrative and a kind of manic depressive narrative, which is also connected to works of existentialism and the fears of social, the fears of others, and how psychology deals with that. And so always being, as I feel it was Emile Cioran put it, that it was those with anxiety are placed between fears of everything having value and nothing having any value. And as someone who experiences manic depression, there is an anxiety in all things that challenge emotional reactivity. In times of calm, I'm plagued with the idea of thinking that I'll have to compromise my sanity for any kind of peace, because it could change as fastly as it did previously. And all the figures, as you can see, I'm sure there'll be some sort of staring after the talk at the work that's present on the website, whatever's happening. The point being, each figure is almost dressed in a Margaritian way, the kind of infographical in dressing the problem in a fine suit and flashy attire, as almost a contemporary fashion to dress up serious problems with almost a convincing appearance to make them more palatable, which is a common argument I find now in fashion, and that there's an attempt to break back the edifice of passionate covers and covers, and is about breaking past the obscured and odd to better analyse serious gripes with the self in contemporary art and culture. I'm exhausted, so that's the end of the talk.